And I apologize, I didn't send out last week's recording. It slipped my mind. So this week when I send out recordings, I'll send out both last week's and this week's. Well, welcome everybody. Does anyone have a question that's a burning issue that they need would like to share with, that they can and would like to share with the group? Yvonne, how are your mobile home issues working out, your park approvals and so forth? You need to unmute.
Sorry, what I was saying is they're consistently interesting. It's gotten harder because the city allowed this 10% on new residents into their ordinance, which means that every time somebody, a buyer comes in, now it's 10% higher, and it's causing the sellers to have to lower their prices to accommodate.
Oh,
so it's definitely hitting the marketing, the selling of the mobile homes. So
let me kind of get my arms around that. This is the city of Santa Rosa?
The city of Santa Rosa allowed this.
All right. So they had a
regulation.
They had a restriction on increases?
They did have, yeah. And I've heard somebody say it was 4%. I don't have the exact, but I know that it used to be, not terribly relevant. And when they did the change in the annual rents and made it better, they also allowed the homeowners, the park ownerships, to push this one through. And so it's on the books right now. So everybody that is trying to sell while that 10% is still there, then it's making getting park approval harder, because it jacks up how much income you have to have. And I'm dealing with one right now that is exactly that the buyer is trying to lessen their mortgage payment just so they can meet the new required amount.
That's interesting.
So, yeah. Okay. And offering less money for the property to begin with. Yeah. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Have you shared any of that with the Norbar what do we call it? Government relations?
No, I actually haven't. The Santa Rosa Mobile Home Residents Association is very, very active. And but I'm just trying to remember if I've seen anything come up on Norbar, because these issues have been going on for a long time, and they're getting more they're getting not more relevant, they're getting harder. They're making the affordability of this type of housing harder and harder. So yeah, I could certainly check in. I can check in with the people that manage the homeowners association and see if they're using Norbar at all.
Yeah, it would be a good outreach to Norbar to have them look at that issue, particularly if it's causing affordability issues, because we always want to support affordability when we can.
Right. Yeah. And that is definitely getting less and less. There's no doubt about it. So
of course, and then on the other hand, we also support property owners' rights. So, the right of the property owner to have an increase. So we might
the trick with this is you have two property owners, because you have the park owner and you also have the homeowner. So yeah, makes it interesting. But anyway, okay. So that's how I'm doing. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's interesting. Okay. Any other comments before I start? I do want to let you know, Heather, as you all know, Heather was a broker, had a broker's license, and she's been a broker associate with us ever since she joined our firms, I don't know how many years ago. I think she's been with us since the start of Randy's and my operation. She's made the giant leap decision to branch out on her own as a real estate broker and a brokerage. So we want to wish Heather, really well and good success. and we'll miss her greatly. She's done a great job being our director of training, and always has contributed greatly to these Friday trainings, and we'll just miss her. So, but we do wish her well, and understand that urge to kind of break out of your skin. I think Anais Nin has a quote about becoming free and needing to break out of your skin, kind of like a butterfly. So anyway, we hope to have. I hope we will plan a little wishing well party, and also a bon voyage party for Rob Ross, who Rob and Heather have been partners, and Rob is going to join Heather in starting that brokerage, but also within in the next month he's moving to Australia. So we want to kind of wish him well as well also. So if you have any questions about that, we will work on getting new training activities in order, and getting a training director identified, if that's appropriate, and we'll let you know of the ongoing trainings coming up. And I will try to backfill with some more guest speakers, like we're going to have Chris be a guest speaker today on short notice. And we'll fill in so you don't just have to listen to me drone on for 45 minutes. Okay. I got a question this week. There's a house on the market that is being listed by 2 different listing agents from 2 different brokerages. Apparently one of the listing agents is mentoring the other. Both names are sign posted out in front of the house. Can you go over that with me, and how 2 different brokerages can work like that? Well, we have gone over in the past the additional broker form. Technically, that's how you would do it. So let me just go here, and we'll just revisit that form. And it's not uncommon. It's right here. Okay. So can you all see that? Just nod your head yes if you can. Okay, thanks. So this is how 2 brokers from 2 agents from different brokerages would work together. And it's an addendum to a listing agreement is the default, or it could be a purchase agreement, or it could be a buyer's representation agreement, or it could be a lease, a listing, or any other type of agreement that one of the parties has entered into. And it's dated, and it's between the seller or buyer, or lessee or lessor, and another party, if appropriate, and regarding a certain address. Okay. And then it says if it's a listing agreement, there's a broker 1 and a broker 2, and they're the co-listers. And then there you could state the compensation breakdown. It's if, like in the question, it's a mentoring relationship, this could be 85-15, it could be 80-20, it could be 75-25. It doesn't have to necessarily be 50-50, though often I see these come through, and the brokerages are splitting the fee 50-50 because they are equal. It's not mentoring relationships, they're just being co-brokers, co-agents. And then it default is it's equally in joint shared responsibility, and then you could check this box and write in some terms like agent 1 is going to take care of all the marketing and MLS presentations and open houses and all that, and will be on the sign. Or you could, if you leave it equally and jointly shared responsibility, then both parties could be on the sign, and so forth and so on. And then you could also attach a different agreement. And then the same thing is number 2 is if you're having an additional broker on a buyer representation agreement, number 3 on a purchase agreement. So we see these forms periodically. A question about typically we would not I know our policy would be that a broker from outside the company wouldn't mentor our agents under our mentoring agreement, and they could still be co-brokers and earn a fee, but they wouldn't necessarily be a mentor in the formal sense of our mentoring agreements within our company. And the reason for that is one broker's policies and procedures may be different from another broker's policies and procedures. So we wouldn't want our agent being guided by another broker. We want them to follow our policies and procedures. So that would be the only rub if that were to come about. But it's certainly okay that they work together, and if they are working together in co-brokers, then each broker is going to have a say in how things get done. But our agent should come to us with any questions, and their agent should go to their broker with any questions. And I'm not going to answer any questions for an agent from Compass or Coldwell Banker. I'm going to say, hey, you need to talk to your own broker about that. So I hope that answers that question. Another question was pocket listings. How do they work? Okay, because we have seen agents stand up in the MLS or the broker tour meetings, which are not MLS meetings, they're NORBAR meetings, but and announce a pocket listing. Well, under our agreements, all of us have an agreement with our MLS that we will submit all of our listings to the MLS to be shared by the other brokers. That's just an agreement of joining the MLS. If you kind of read the forms when you sign up, it's in there. It's one of those things we don't read those forms, and if we read them 20 years ago when we joined. But the policy of the MLS is that when a broker and an agent who's a member gets a listing, that they will put it in the MLS. So there's 2 things that why we might write up a listing and not put it in the MLS. And one would be an exception form from the MLS. And I don't know that that's a CAR form. I think it's just a BERIS form. Do you know, Chris? Is that a CAR or a BERIS form?
The MLS exception. Yeah, there is a CAR form, but the BERIS requests that you provide their form as well.
Great.
Having the cells on.
Right. Thank you. So we would go to the BERIS website under forms and pull up the exception to MLS. And that happens quite often when we're getting a property ready for listing. So we list it now, September 1st, but it's not going to be ready to go on the market till September 15th or September 20th. So we have this period of time where there's an exception from the MLS. The seller signs off on that, and we can take the listing, but we don't enter it in the MLS yet. And then there could be, I think on that same form, it provides that the seller wants to exclude the property altogether from the MLS. And they have the right to do that. I mean, all our listing forms and our recommendations are that they put the property in the MLS because it's the best way to get it sold. I mean, experience has shown that if we share the information among all the members of the MLS, that's going to sell it quicker than just trying to, talk about it in a meeting. So, but some sellers, they don't want to deal with all those people. And they said, well, listen, I'll pay you if you bring me a buyer. And you say, okay, well, I'll sign up a listing but I don't want it in the MLS. So you can sign a listing around that. And then you use that exclusion form to exclude it permanently from the MLS, or until the seller changes their mind because the property doesn't sell. And that's what we call a pocket listing. Now, under the listing forms, it's an exclusive right to sell listing form. There's an exclusive brokerage listing form. And then there's the open listing form. Well, we always want to use the exclusive right to sell form. The open listing form is like the seller says to you, well, I'll pay you if you bring me a buyer. And you want to get that in writing, you could use the open listing form. But they'll also, Cherie may have that agreement with the seller. And then Sharon may go to the seller and say, hey, I have a buyer for you. And he says, okay, I'll pay you if you bring me a buyer. And she'll sign an open listing too. So a seller could have as many open listings as they want, which is not a good thing for either Sharon or Cherie, because they're working against everybody else. So it's best to have the exclusive right to sell, where we're the exclusive agent, and the pocket listing generally will be under an exclusive right to sell, but the seller will just exclude it from the MLS. And so since there's no offer of compensation in the MLS, the question is, how will we be paid as if we bring a buyer to that listing, that pocket listing? So it's just like a FSBO. The FSBO is somebody who hasn't listed in the MLS, but you have a buyer for his property. So you go to the FSBO and say, hey, I have a buyer for your property. I don't want to work for free. So how much will you compensate us if we get into contract and close the property? And they'll say, well, I'll compensate you, 3% if you bring me a buyer with the right price. So, what's the right price? And and it gives you a price, and then you can work on that. And what you would get in that case is, let's go back to our forms here. We'll look up commission agreement. Oh, I haven't loaded commission agreement. Interesting. That hasn't come up. Okay, there we are. So here we have the commission agreement. And it says, it's between the principal and the broker, and it identifies the price and the property. It talks about the benefits of using the MLS. But it says the percentage that the seller is willing to pay. Here it is, percent. So here we would have 3%. So you prepare this form, you take it to the seller. It's not a listing agreement, it's just a commission agreement. So you would use this with a FSBO, or you would use it on that pocket listing. And this agreement is between the principal and the broker. Now, if you're working with the other agent, you could also use this form to get confirmation that that other agent's going to share the commission. Or there may be a different form for that, but call me if you get into that situation. So that's how a pocket listing works. We also have those listings in certain locations where the listing agent's offering only $1 or a fee that's not suitable for a buyer's agent. So then again, they expect us to negotiate a commission agreement based on the price of the property we're bringing in, or they're expecting us to have a buyer broker agreement that where we'll get paid by the buyer and not by the seller. Okay, does that answer that question? Yeah, Cherie?
Yeah, I think I might come talk to you because I don't I have sort of further questions, but thank you for explaining it. I know somebody that's got a pocket listing, and well, I know the owner, and it's a house I know of already. So she's is sort of the buyer's agent, like such. What if I found a buyer for the house? Is that allowed? And how would I show it? Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah, okay. So if it's not in the MLS and
Right.
you know that seller, you could call that seller directly. It's a violation of our code of ethics to interfere with another agent's listing. But the
Right.
only way we would know the agent has a listing is primarily through the MLS, or they show us a copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
So until we have that knowledge, you're totally free to call that seller directly and say, hey, I may have a buyer for your property. Do you have an agreement with an agent to represent you? Do you have a listing agreement with an agent who's representing you? And I will contact them in that case. If they say, well, no, I told so-and-so that they could sell the property, but I didn't give them a listing agreement. And then you can continue your conversation and say, okay, well, I have a buyer. Would you like to work with me and my buyer? Because I can bring this buyer to you directly, unless you want, instruct me to work through that other agent. And, then you move forward slowly, a step at a time. But you ask those preliminary questions first, and then you move forward as you start to get answers. Does that make sense?
I see. Yes, I think I will still tell you the whole scenario after this.
Okay.
Thank you. That really
Great.
helps so far.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay. I'm going to do some basic, I didn't have any other questions this week. So I'm going to do some basic grid work. It's always good to work in the grid, right? So let me go back. And for those of you experienced on the line who want to chime in on how, I'll kind of open up some of these questions and say, how would you handle this? And you can let us know. And you can help us all along. So the grid, how long we had this form now? December of 22, so almost a year. So we all should be pretty familiar with the grid. And what the grid has done is it's pulled all the various terms of the contract into this grid. They used to be spread out through the RPA, which was, and you had to go, search through all the paragraphs in the RPA to find these little details. Now they're all in one place. And they refer, under paragraph number here, this column, they refer to the paragraph at which they are addressed in the RPA itself. But they have their own numbers here. So 3A is the purchase price. I did have a question this week, and they said, they're a listing agent. They said, we received an offer. My seller wants to counter the offer. In preparing the counter, can I just reference the paragraph 3A, or do I have to reference 5 and 5B as well? And no, these paragraphs are valid, 3A, 3B, C. So if you're countering any clause here under paragraph 3, you just say 3A. So 3 in reference 3A, purchase price shall be. That's what you put in the counter. So here you would put your purchase price, and if it's all cash, you would check cash. And 3B is the close of escrow. And it's either so many days, which is typical, or it's a date certain, in which you could say, December 31st. you know, or it could be 30 days, 60 days, 45 days, whatever you decide. Expiration of offer. The default is 3 days after all the buyer's signatures, or on a certain date. So this the expiration is actually 3 days after the buyer's signature. Well, what if the seller doesn't see it for 2 days, or 3 days, or on the 4th day? It's not after 3 days after the seller sees it. It's 3 days after the buyer signs it. So if you talk, hopefully you've talked to the listing agent, I'm going to write an offer on your property, get your seller around. That would be a good question to ask them. He said, no, they're in Europe. I can't reach them. They're on a submarine. I can't get a hold of them. So you better write up, your offer not to expire for 5 days, because they won't be back. So then you would write in here 5 days or a date certain. But the default is 3 days after the buyers sign it. Okay. The initial deposit, we often talk about that. There's no magic number here. I generally use kind of as a rule of thumb, 1% of the purchase price. I don't put in 1%, I just put in the dollar amount. I like to use the dollars because it's more meaningful to the seller to see the dollar amount than a percentage. They'd rather see $500,000 than 2. So I put the number in here, and then and the default is it'll put this in within 3 days of business days after acceptance by wire transfer. So the default now is wire transfer. We used to take checks. We don't take checks any longer. If someone wants to hand you a check because they don't do wire transfers, be sure to enter it in our check log. Our check log, we hadn't used it for so long, it got lost in Sonoma, but we found it recently. So you log in the check for as long as you hold it, and when you take it over to the title company, you log it out and say where it went. And we looked back in the check log, and it hadn't, because we had lost it, it hadn't been updated for about a year, and we had to clean up some of the old stuff because DRE will come in and audit us, and they'll want to look at our check log. And if we've got checks outstanding from 2 years ago that haven't been disposed of, they're not going to be happy with that. That's not good practice. So we cleaned it up, and it's in order now. And then each of our offices has a check log if you need to take a check. But ideally, we don't handle money anymore. And then there's the increased deposit, D2, 3D2. This shall be placed in escrow after the initial deposit. And you use the form DID at the time of increased deposit. I don't know that we've ever looked at the DID form. Maybe I'll pull that up. But anyway, the practice that we recommend is that the combination of D1 and D2, the initial deposit and the increased deposit, be 3%. And the reason is because 3% is the magic number for residential 1 to 5 homes that the seller could receive as liquidated damages if liquidated damages are part of the contract. So it's kind of the maximum amount the seller could receive under state law if the buyer defaults. So there's no sense putting in 6% there, where the combination of 6%, because then you have to fight to get 3% back if the buyer defaults. So we try to make the combination of 1 and 2 equal 3%. And that's put into escrow within, the default is upon removal of all contingencies. And you could check in boxes here or. So let's just take a minute and look at the DID form. I don't think I've ever pulled that up. Okay. Chris, do we get the DID form typically in our transactions?
I don't see a lot of increased deposits, especially written into the contract. I'd say maybe 1 out of 10 contracts I see have the increased deposit. But if so, as a transaction coordinator, yes, I request this form because you want that chunk of money covered.
Right, good. Yeah, so this is to be used at time of increased deposit is paid, not with the offer or a counter offer. So you've removed your contingencies, your buyer is going to increase their deposit, and you use this form, and it puts the date, the amount, how it's been done, wired funds typically, payable to the escrow company, and the amount. And if the buyer and seller have agreed to liquidated damages in the agreement, which 95% of the time they have, probably 99% of the time, this is hereby incorporated and made a part of this addendum. And the reason you do that is because if you don't kind of incorporate this in this form, then there could be a question about whether it becomes part of the liquidated damages. So that's the DID form. Any questions on that? Okay, so I'm going to cover one more area here, the loans, and I'll ask some of our experienced agents to kind of help me with this. So you're going to have a first loan, and then you're going to, let's just say it's going to be a fixed rate. These buttons here, not to exceed and buyer to pay up to points. Do we typically want to fill those out? Raise your hand if you want to answer. Come on, I've got some agents who have done this. Curtis says absolutely in the chat. You need, if you're writing an offer for a buyer, this protects the buyer in the event they can't get an interest rates stated here. So they would have the right to terminate the agreement based on the fact that they couldn't get their loan, their interest rate. Now, even if they qualify for a higher interest rate, let's say you put in here today, you put in 7.5. But their loan's not locked. So you go through the process and you have a 17-day contingency period for the loan approval. Market changes, and now they can only get an 8% loan. Now they can qualify for the 8% loan, and the lender will give them an 8% loan, but they don't want an 8% loan. So, they can terminate on this clause, E1, because the interest rate they can't get a 7.5% interest rate loan. Now, if that were blank and they wanted a 7.5% loan and they could only get an 8% loan, then and they could qualify for an 8% loan, the seller might say, well, wait a second, you can't say you couldn't get your loan commitment because you got one. It's just not at the interest rate you want. So if you default, if you cancel now, you're defaulting. So, you don't want to have that kind of argument. So it is clearly best to put in the interest rate, and you can talk to your the lender for the buyer. I would definitely want you to do that before you write the offer, and say, what interest rate shall I put in the contract? Now, I was at the Napa chapter meeting yesterday for tour, and the lender made a good point. They were the guest speaker, spotlight speaker, and they said, get your buyers fully qualified before you write the offer. That's the ideal situation. So they've gotten their credit report, they've gotten their verifications of employment, they've gotten a verification of funds, They've got a full underwriting package except for appraisal. And then you really know that buyer's ready to go, subject to the appraisal. So that is the ideal situation where you're working with a buyer and you make sure they go through all the steps with their lender, hopefully one of our Pinnacle agents, to get fully qualified before you submit the offer. And then you can submit a much stronger letter. I mean, as he said yesterday, that's equivalent of a cash offer. So now you're competing with a cash offer because you have kind of basically removed loan contingency except for the appraisal. So that's for the importance of that particular clause. Okay. On the spur of the moment, I appreciate Chris's willingness to kind of take us through steps of dealing with your TC. When you've taken a new listing, what do you do for the TC and get the paperwork to them? And B, when you've written an offer or gotten an accepted contract as either a listing agent or the buyer's agent, what do you do to make our TCs happy and us happy?
Thanks, Gary. So the beginning of our relationship begins whenever you have paperwork. If that's for buyer representation, you now have presented an offer that has been accepted and it becomes a contract. That's when I step in. You deliver to me all of the lovely paperwork that you have on hand, preferably beginning with the TIS form. And if you haven't seen that, it's a fairly simple BHG form that states the property address, all of your information and your client's information if you would like your TC to work hand in hand with them. Typically that means sending out paperwork for signature and that sort of thing. From the listing side perspective, once you get a listing agreement signed, same sort of thing. You pass that along to us, along with your TIS form that gives us the information you want us to have. It's also very important, not only for the TCs, but also for the commissions department to have the TIS form filled out nicely. And you're welcome to reach out to me at tcchrisbrown@gmail.com. If you don't already have one of those forms, you can fill it out online or you can print it out and handwrite into it. You can also reach out to Katie Medina. She's got these too. So if you don't have that, feel free to ask. But back to if you're representing a seller, once you have a listing agreement signed, you present that and then the information you want us to have. And then we get to decide whether you're having your fantastic TC do disclosures for you. Myself, and I believe Katie does as well. I'm not sure about Keely. I use glide.com to do most of the disclosures. If you don't know about that, it's fairly simple. It very literally glides you through all of the forms as a seller. For a standard residential home, it's going to be the TDS and the SPQ, just line by line asking, hey, any deaths on the property in the last 3 years, etc. And it fills out that form for them, and then we send it for signature. So again, if you want your transaction coordinator doing so, put that on the TIS form when you have some paperwork and send it our direction. And then we just go from there. And that's kind of the gist of our relationship.
Thanks, Chris. Heather walked through the TIS form last week in last week's training. So when I send out the videos of last week and this week, I recommend you go back to last week's video if you're not familiar with the TIS. And she goes through each of the blanks in the TIS and why they're important to fill out as completely as possible to make it not only easy for you, because you have this knowledge of all this stuff, but for the TC who's setting up our file. So look for that in last week's training when we send the 2 videos out this week. When we used to do this by hand and not digitally, remember those days, Jan and Curtis and Sharon? We we still needed to provide a broker file. I mean, that law has always been in place, that the broker needs to maintain a file and supervise the agent. The way we supervise the agent in a transaction is usually by reviewing the broker file, make sure all the paperwork is in order. So I remember we would, my practice was, as soon as I had a document signed by all the parties, not by one of the parties, but all the parties that needed to sign it, I'd walk it over to the administrative person, who we didn't call them TCs back then, but she was basically a TC at the time, and hand her the papers, and photocopies. We did have copy machines, so we'd have a photocopy. So I had a copy and she had a copy, and then each time I got a new document, fully signed, not partially signed, because how many partially signed documents do you have to work through, Chris?
Most of them.
Right.
So your version of presenting a fully executed document is the dream. That's a diligent agent.
Yeah, right.
Doing it the right way.
Right. So try not to send your TC a partially signed or partially completed document unless it's going to be countersigned. Okay. And then you're going to get a second full one back from the other side. Okay. So let's say you've signed one and you send it out to the other party, and well, I still think you should probably wait to get it signed, but there's going to be some delay in getting it back. You might send that along, but ideally wait until you have a fully signed document before sending it to your TC. And then, we used to keep our files along with the company file. But as you know from attending the BLM, broker risk management, BRM, broker risk management webinars, they don't like us agents to keep our files anymore. Other than our contact information with the client. We obviously want you to stay in touch with the client. So keep the client's contact information and put them in your SOI and stay in contact with the client. But they don't, the best practices for us as agents is to give all our documents, all our copies of all our correspondence, copies of our digital correspondence, phone messages if we have them, everything to the TC, and then that becomes the broker file for when we get served with a subpoena or a lawsuit down the road. We only have to deal with one file, because I can't tell you how many times in the old days we'd be addressing a problem that was evolving into a lawsuit, and we'd be subpoenaed for a file. We'd have the broker's file, and then we'd have the agent's file. Well, the agent's file had notes in it and other stuff that the broker never saw, and that was not good because the attorneys on the other side would say, "Well, what about this? This note?" And we said, "Well, that's not in our file." He said, "Well, you weren't supervising your agent." And it just, things get sideways, and when you go into those kind of situations. So get all your documents in the broker's file, and then, in due course, eliminate your file, shred your file. Okay, that's our practice. Any questions on that? Okay, well, I think that's good. I'll let you go a little before 12. Any other questions I can address before we sign off today? Okay, I don't know if I'm in town next week. Let me see. Or something happened. No, I am not in town next week, so I'll send out a notice that we won't have training next week, and we'll pick it up on the following week. All right? Everybody have a good weekend. Oh, Chris, go ahead. You have a question?
I was just gonna say, I will be in Sonoma from 11 to 1 on Tuesday,
Okay.
talking with some new agents. If you want some new agent stuff, including going over the contract in a very generic sense, and how to recruit some buyers, again, in a very generic sense, you're welcome to come if
Yeah,
that
Chris,
suits.
we postponed that meeting or that training. So yeah,
Oh,
sorry. I thought you had been informed of that. So
I had not.
okay, yeah. So we let everyone know that that was not going to take place right now. But
Perfect. Sounds good.
okay, thanks. All right, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you later. Be well. Thanks for your help, Chris.